Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the session on issues and solutions for the bottom billion, with the important subtitle, Towards an Inclusive and Sustainable Globalization. The session will have implicitly three parts. First, there will be an introduction and opening remarks. Thereafter, we will have three keynote speeches by three former heads of states of Benin, Mauritius, and Nigeria. And the third part will be a panel discussion before we conclude. As the time constraints are heavy, I will just refrain now from doing any substantive introduction, and I would like to ask Mr. Jiro Hanyu to take the floor immediately. Mr. Hanyu is the chairman of the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, and in this capacity, he has initiated and successfully directed a project on globalization, disparity, and poverty, which in a sense is the conceptual and intellectual basis for our meeting today. Mr. Hanyu, your floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Wolfgang. Your Excellency, former President of Nigeria, Mr. Obasanjo, Your Excellency, former President of Benin, Mr. Soglo, Your Excellency, former President of Mauritius, Mr. Hoffman, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great privilege for me to open this session on issue and solution for the bottom billion in cooperation with International Future Forum. First of all, I would like to express my deepest appreciation to three presidents of African countries and Professor Oniang'o of Kenya, who have traveled great distances and taken their valuable time from their very busy schedule to attend this Forum 2000. And also my special gratitude goes to Professor Itoh of Tokyo University, Ms. Molina-Gallart of the Save the Children, and Dr. Mihalowski of International Future Forum for their participation in this session as a speaker, panelist, and moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, as I introduced to you, three prominent former presidents of African countries come to this session. This clearly indicates the strong wishes of the African presidents who pay tribute to the memory of President Havel. To take this opportunity, on behalf of Sasakawa Peace Foundation, I would like to pay my highest respects to what President Havel had done and thought. Now I would like to ask you to allow me to introduce the result of our study on this issue briefly. Around 2 years ago, together with International Future Forum and President and Professor Itoh, we started to study on the subject of globalization and disparity. After intensive study, my foundation reached the conclusion that globalization succeeded in bringing huge economic development, but failed to solve the extremely poverty problem, particularly in the least developing countries. The review report on Millennium Development Goals 2011 proves this clearly. I would like to draw your attention on one of the most important targets of Millennium Development Goals: halve the proportion of the people who suffer from hunger. According to the report, in 1990, 20% of the population, total number of 828 million people are suffering from hunger. And now 2009, still 17% of the population, total number of 1.02 billion people are suffer. In these 20 years, total number has increased, and at last it reached the level of 1 billion. Most of these people are living in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. Furthermore, the famous target, halve the proportion of the people whose income less than $1.25 per day, which is considered to be met successfully. However, If the great contribution of China and India are excluded, the number of people in extremely poor increased in the least developing countries, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. In 20 years, the number of those people increased around 30%. I believe not only my foundation, but also international community has fully recognized these facts, so that it is widely said that globalization must be a positive force to all human beings and minimize the negative effect. But if so, first of all, we should consider how to rescue the people living in extremely poverty. And we found undoubtedly aid will be able to play a very important role for the rescue of these people, particularly in the least developing countries, not with quantitative increase of aid amount, but with a certain change of the existing framework of aid. Based on almost the same recognition, a week before, 16th of October, United Nations publicized a report to propose to set up the fund named Global Fund for Social Protection for the least developing countries. This fund will be functioned as a kind of social safety net in these countries. I congratulate two experts who produced this report, since they seriously recognize the problem of extremely poverty and try to solve the problem. My foundation focused on the changing of the existing aid regime, not proposing the aid new fund. Now I would like to draw your attention to three major problems in the existing aid regime. Firstly, the existing aid related the realization of fundamental human rights, such as free from starvation, are now provided, not based on the common obligation of responsibility of all states, but moral commitment of developed countries. In spite of the firm description on basic human rights in Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Human Rights Charter, which were ratified by all the member states of the United Nations. Second problem is relating to the priority of providing aid. I fully recognize the importance of the values of aid for economic development, which is necessary to improve the social and economic conditions of developing countries. At the same time, we should bear in mind there exist nearly 1 billion of people in extreme poverty whose living are in critical condition. I think, first of all, aid for the rescue of these people should be provided, and the aid for economic development should be considered at the next stage. Here I would like to remind you of the remarks of this year in Tokyo by Secretary General of World Food Plan, Madam Kazun. She said that drought in West Africa invited serious starvation in 8 African countries, and WFP needed less than $800 million, but it could only get half. She requested assistance. We know total amount of ODA, official development aid, reached more than 130 billion annually, but we cannot find 400 million to rescue the starvation in West Africa, because we have no international consensus on priority of aid. Third one is regarding to the problem in aid recipient side, which are often pointed out by donor countries. As I referred earlier, every state is responsible for realization of basic human rights. Then the recipient country of such aid has a serious obligation to take necessary measures for the delivery of aid and undergo international auditing, which verifies the appropriateness of these measures. Again, there exists no international agreement of introducing of such strong auditing on aid delivery. Considering all this, I am obliged to say that existing regime for aid shows sharp contrast with the regime for mitigation of climate change. As you know well, almost all countries agreed on the Climate Change Convention. and accepted the principle of the common obligation under the different responsibility to reduce the greenhouse effect gas. While in the field of aid, neither international convention nor international agreement which developing countries fully participate has ever existed. I believe the time has come to consider the introduction of a new international instrument on aid to decide the obligation and responsibility of donor and recipient countries. Now, I am very much looking forward to listening to the keynote speeches given by 3 presidents of Africans, and also the discussion by the representatives from the NGOs. I am convinced that these speeches and discussion will highly enlighten us on this issue. Finally, I'd like to express my sincere wish that this session will contribute to future serious discussion on the necessity of an international agreement on new aid scheme. Thank you very much for your kind, patient listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hanyu. I would like to invite now Professor Motoshige Itoh to present his introductory remarks. Mr. Itoh is Dean of the Institute for Graduate School of Economics and the Faculty of Economics of the famous University of Tokyo. He has also served at many occasions as an advisor to the Japanese government. Itoh-san, the floor is yours.
Thank you, welcome. It's my great pleasure to be here to just discuss this topic. As Mr. Hanyu just mentioned, the Sasakawa Peace Foundation just started this project more than 2 years ago. And the starting subject was the globalization and disparity. And as we just do a kind of discussion and analysis, we found just the issue is much more complicated, because when you are talking about disparity, you can just think about at least 2 different things. One is income gap or income disparity, and the other is poverty. And although these 2 are very much related, we must focus the issue more carefully, because so many things are going on in this globalization world, and the important thing is how we focus our attention, and eventually that will lead to the focusing of the resources to solve the problem. So as we just discussing, we start thinking maybe poverty issue is the #1 issue. And so we are trying to just more concentrating on the discussion about the globalization and poverty. Also, we have a lot of mentioning about just the globalization and the income disparity or income gap. And some of the results is summarized in the report, I think circulated to you. And I just follow up Mr. Hanyu because he just already mentioned a very important part of the aspect. One thing is timing is very important, as you know, because the millennium, the development goal is now in process, but is eventually ending. And we have to just think very seriously what we are going to do after millennium development goal. And in order to just have a very effective approach to these issues, I think time is necessary for us to just activate and increase the discussion among all people involved in this issue and to get more attention from the public. And about the millennium development goal, if you look at the number, it achieves something. Like if you look at the total number of poor people, people living under the income of $1.25 per year, the total number is declining. Mostly because the decline is in the country like China and India. As you probably know, this country is just participating in the globalization economic activity, and economic growth just providing just very poor people more opportunity to work. And so if you look at just only the number, the total number of the poor people are declining. But it is not the case for many other countries, especially, as Mr. Hanyu said, the sub-Saharan countries. There's very substantial increase of the poor people. So the globalization and some of our effort in the previous did have some result, but it is far from reaching our target. So there must be some renewed approach to the issue. And so we have the discussion about this issue, and I think three the element is important. One, which I have already mentioned briefly, refocusing. Okay, maybe it is too dangerous to say we have enough resources to solve this problem, or it's very still controversial. But if you look at the number of ODA in the past 10 years, it is increasing quite rapidly because probably there's more attention in donor countries to provide money. Also, we have some kind of uncertainty now because of the declining economic condition. And many countries now facing fiscal problem. But so far, ODA is increasing. But the problem is the quite large amount of money of the ODA is actually moving into the so-called infrastructure construction and the development issues. And not so much money is just going into the poverty issues. So that is the area where I said of refocusing is important. We have to, if we think just poverty is so important from the macro view aspect, from macro viewpoint, the refocusing and the more money is coming into the poverty issue. This is not just only just the reallocation of money, and also I think it is very much related to just the ordering of the development aid. The most important urgent problem is how we can just provide the support for the poor people. And then we may have more opportunity to talk about economic development and sustainable growth. For that, more people can have opportunity to just participate in the globalization world. So refocusing is important. And also refocusing is also very important when we talk discussing this issue, because the situation is very different between a country like China and India and the country in sub-Saharan countries. Although there's still a very significant, difficult problem in the country like India and China, but these countries has the capability of doing a lot of things by themselves because they have a very expanding and strong economic powers. But when it comes to the many sub-Saharan countries, it seems not very easy for them just to deal with the problem by themselves. So there must be more comprehensive the support from the rest of the world. So anyway, the refocusing is important. We have to think more serious about how much money is necessary and how we can do. But anyway, this is the one element. And second very important thing is we have to much more voice from many different parts of the world, not only from donor countries, but also recipient countries, but more importantly, people who are working in the field, and also people, the voice from the people in the poor situation. And so I think this kind of forum is very important. Fortunately, we have three distinguished former presidents from African countries. And so this kind of the discussion is very important. And so I hope we still have some more years before we restart the post-Millennium Development Goal project. So I hope this kind of discussion is just activated. And the third is, of course, the restructuring or the changing the scheme of the aid is necessary. Everyone just recognizes there's a very famous problem of the last 1 mile problems. There's quite a large amount of resources provided by donor countries, but unfortunately, it did not reach to the people who need it. And so there must be some kind of the weakness of the structures. And there are a lot of course, the studies and the also mentioning by the people working in these areas, there's increasing attention to the so-called the conditional cash transfer, which means just give directly money to the people who need on some conditions. And that may provide some kind of incentive for the people to just more effectively utilize this system. And probably we can hear more about just the better idea of the reshaping the scheme of the support. And so, as Mr. Hanyu mentioned, there must be more commitment from donor side and more participation from the recipient side, and for more sophisticated the information is necessary to just the more effective way to use the money. So anyway, so the time is limited, and because I have to just leave the time for the presentation by President, I want to say this is a very important timing for all of us to discuss this is more seriously and to just get more momentum to move these issues to more effective way in the future. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Itoh-san, for your contribution. I would like to thank both Mr. Hanyu and Mr. Itoh for their clear presentation of the policy conclusions of our project. We are now moving to the second part of this session, the keynote speeches of 3 former heads of states of African countries. And the first is President Soglo from Benin. After having been Prime Minister of Benin from 1990 to 1991, President Soglo was elected in the first multi-party presidential elections in 1991. He stayed in office until 1996, using his term to successfully reform and refurbish the then devastated Benin economy. And what is very important in the context of our meeting here, and I think of the Forum 2000 conference in general, his government was praised for its adherence to democratic principles and to the respect of human rights, even when these reforms, as they usually do, we see this in Europe these days too, to some social unrest. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, it is my first stay in Prague, and under the umbrella of President Václav Havel, everyone was talking about democracy, how great man, how great writer. And it reminds me President Senghor of Senegal. And one also is now in, in the grave of a great man in France, Aimé Césaire from Caribbean Island. So having such a great man, and what we heard in the opening session this morning, in our tradition in Africa, dead people are not dead. They're still alive between us. You can feel them through the air, through the, the water, different kind of thing. So it is the reason for me it is a moving session, definitively being here in Prague. Of course, I have to thank His Excellency Jiro Hanyu, the chairman of Sasakawa Peace Foundation, and also Professor Itoh, because we are together with you in Tokyo to tackle one of the very difficult issues. It is how in the world of crisis we are going in everywhere, in the United States, in Europe, everywhere in the world. You are going to talk about the poor, the poorest part of the world. No one is ready to listen to you because they are going to say, are you serious? We have our own problem, but the issue of poverty, disparity, is a crucial one. I have to praise, of course, Sasakawa, because being former executive director of the World Bank, I remember when we were there, you are asking the richest country to finance food crops in Africa. And they used to tell us, don't worry. We have plenty of food in the United States, plenty of food in Europe. You have only to care about coffee, tea, cotton, and you are going to take care of your belly. It was something, you can't discuss because they have a full majority on the board. But when we had this terrible drought in 1982, Sasakawa came and said we have to change the rule of the game. We have to help the poorest country in the world to feed themselves. So it was something, it's a matter of vision. At that time, we don't have the statistic about what the future of Africa Sahara will be. Because now we know that the statistic is saying that even you take HIV, different kind of disease, malaria, the population in Africa, sub-Sahara, will be, by the year 2050, around 1.8 or 2 billion. If you don't have vision to know that you need to feed all these people, how can you move? Where you are going to find, I think, the food and the different kind of thing. So it is the reason when they invite me, because he came to pay me a visit, the president of Peace Foundation, to talk about the poorest people in the world, you know, the bottom billion in Cotonou. He said, what is this idea where we are inside of this big turmoil of crisis, to talk about that? And we went to Tokyo to discuss the major issue of poverty disparity. Because when you are in the bank, you have to, every 4 years, to have a replenishment of ODA. But to come and say we are going to discuss at this time, I think it's kind of provocative, approach. But I think it is timely. Why? I am saying this because we came here, I think, today to make validation about that. Because Africa is, in my viewpoint, maybe I am too optimistic, but it is, I think, the far west of many countries in the world. People are coming from China, United States, Europe, to make their market there, because they need, of course, raw materials. But we want to do business with them. What we are asking for, it is to make sure when we're doing business with making their market, to take care of the poorest, as, Sasakawa, this vision they have before everyone. It's the reason when we discussed this issue in Tokyo, I remember I challenged some of the people because they said, everyone knows that you are following your own interests. When the United States, they came in Europe after the Second World War, they have in their mind their own interests. After, the defeat of Adolf Hitler, and they said we don't want, Soviet Union to take over. So they put the Marshall Plan for the poorest. And also they have a project with them. They built something. When they finished, they went to Asia. And they have a project also for Japan. And, they developed Japan because in front you have Red China. And they need, of course, to have a friend. And Japan became the second, economy in the world. Because when you have a project, not only you have looking at the people like, you give them some grant, no. It is someone you want to do business with. And to take also in account the poor people in the country. They did that. I remember that we had the feeling that when the interest is in you can understand easily that they know what to do. So the project Sasakawa has, I think, in front of us, it's what we are going to discuss with the European countries, with the American one. We are ready to welcome them in Africa, but to have a project, because when they went, later in Asia, because you have a Pearson report, in 1969, after, Mao Zedong took over in China, they said that Asia is in a very bad shape. We need to do something for them, to bring, to help the poorest. Because if you take at that time the statistics, except Japan, the GDP of African countries are more than Asian at that time. And they did everything. Of course, you have Korean War, Vietnam, and they changed, I think, the face of the world in Asia. They did that. So it is the reason when the crumbling of the Berlin Wall came, we in my country, we start what we call the National Conference. And Professor Michalski talked about that. Peaceful transition. And it is now my friend who is the chairman of library in Alexandria, who was vice president in the World Bank. He said, you have what they call the spring of the Arabic countries. But after the crumbling of the, the Berlin Wall, you have, sub-Sahara, kind of spring. No one is talking about that. So I think to conclude about that, it seems to me timely for Sasakawa as usual, because when they came to talk about how to focus on the poorest and to do business in the same time, because we are going to sell this idea to the people, because Africa, because we are used to meet together, the former head of state in the African Forum, to discuss this issue. What kind of priority we are going to, because if we are going to tell them you are going to do business, to raise money, you come for your market, but not only that, you have to take care also about the poorest, because you have a project. I remember when we had the crumbling of the Berlin Wall, the European countries, they have a project for Eastern countries in Europe, because it's very broader. We in Africa at that time, we are waiting for them. They cut by almost, more than half the aid to Africa. And because between, they use time to sell a plenty of bad projects, because you have oil shock, and they want to sell any kind of white elephant to Africa. I think the project of Sasakawa is timely for me, because what you discuss on you, so it is, I think, correct. Now, it is to know, to see all these European countries involved in the structural adjustment program. I was with the Prime Minister of France. We were a few months, together. I told him, when he visited me in my country, God doesn't forget anyone. Being executive director of the bank, I used to go and to implement the structures adjustment program to all the 24 countries I have in my constituency. And today I'm alive to see Greece were called that, the cradle of European civilization. involved in a structural adjustment program. Portugal, the country of Henri, you know, the navigator, used to go on the coast of Africa to take some slaves, and they're involved in a structural adjustment program. And Spain, country of the man who went to your Christophe Columbus, involved in a structural adjustment program. And the country of someone like where the Roman Empire was involved. So Europe is involved in that. And when we met, I told them, don't forget that it is the end of two cycles in Europe. Cycle of slave trade, which helped to build the Chateau de Versailles. So I told the people when we were in the harbor of Nantes, when you are going to visit the next time Chateau de Versailles, don't forget that is built with the blood of people. But we are, you know, growing step by step. So it is the reason the project we discussed with Professor Michalski, he said a wonderful thing. He said, the stronger have not to dominate the weak all the time, because when you don't have the strength anymore, you need to talk. Facts. So thank you very much, I think, for this gathering. I have to praise Sasakawa, to praise, of course, the Peace Foundation professor, and yourself, I think, Professor Michalski, because it was a very fruitful meeting in Tokyo. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President Soglo, for sharing with us your experience. This is very valuable, and we expect the same from you, President Obasanjo from Nigeria. You were twice head of state in your country. First as a military ruler at the end of the 70s, and in this capacity, you have greatly contributed to lead your country to civilian government and democracy. And as an elected president from 1999 to 2007, you fought corruption, and you successfully reformed the economy of your country. During his 2 terms, the rate of growth of Nigeria was doubled from 3% to 6%. And just to give you one other figure, the foreign exchange reserves increased from, during the 2 terms of President Obasanjo, from 2 billion to 43 billion. So again, we will have, I think, a contribution on interesting experience of a head of state of an African country. The floor is yours, Your Excellency.
I am pleased to share with you my thoughts on this very critical matter, and I sincerely hope that my contribution on this issue will add something to the debate about what globalization and poverty mean to all of us, not just to those of us identified as the bottom billion in the developed, developing, and least developed world. I note with a deep sense of respect and admiration the consistent efforts made by many of us here today, and in particular the Sasakawa Peace Foundation and Forum 2000 to facilitate discussions on ways and possible solutions to improve the lot of humanity generally, in one way or the other, but the lot of the poor in particular. In the last 30 years or so, I have seen at first hand the efforts of Sasakawa in the field of agriculture in Africa, through Sasakawa Global 2000, now Sasakawa Africa Association. In the same vein, I also feel the need to once again raise the hand in salute to President Havel for the things he did and what he tried to show the rest of us when he was alive, and what he tried to achieve working with many organizations, individuals, and institutions like Sasakawa Foundation when they had the time and the opportunity. Indeed, our meeting here is essentially part of the product of that opportunity, and may Havel's spirit and legacy continue to live on. I want to begin my presentation by going back a little bit into history to establish some of the trends and thoughts I think should be of interest to us as a people and as humanity. About the middle of the 1950s, when the process of decolonization in parts of Africa was taking sway, it was the belief of the developed world, which also probably formed with the Marshall Plan for war-torn Europe, that by transferring some resources in the form of official development assistance to the newly independent states, progress can be made generally in the growth of the economy and the enhancement of prosperity for the newly independent people of African region and other regions. Emphasis was placed on aid, and unfortunately, to the neglect of other ingredients that make for development. Initially, the decades when aid was provided showed some movement in the achievement of its stated goals and objectives of economic growth and enhancement of prosperity. As a result, international organizations and international community started to encourage, along with aid, policies like the import substitution strategy. It was thought that industrialization could be pursued in such a way that local people could gain capacity and earn subsistence wages by putting together the CKD, completely knocked down and partially knocked down components on their own in assemblies built for them. The strategies worked immediately by enhancing the production and manufacturing components in the West in the form of massive production of the CKD and PKD shipped to be reassembled in Africa. One of the major problems is that it failed with the slightest shock or jolt in the availability of foreign exchange to maintain regular supply for the assembly lines. The jolt came with the oil shock of 1973. In managing the excess liquidity and funds in the commercial banks of the West, loans were indiscriminately given to most countries in Africa, which were poorly utilized, corruptly embezzled by the givers and the receivers. With another jolt, the loans became unpayable. Then SAP, which my brother referred to. I didn't know that you were the one implementing that. Structural adjustment program was designed and introduced. One of its main objectives was to ensure that developing nations will have or save enough to reduce the debts they owed many institutions of the West. That also failed because in reality, there was no structure to be adjusted, and rather, those countries became impoverished. With the constant failures of different ideas and strategies for development, the bulk of the challenges had to be passed to the government of the recipient country, who more often than not were highly inefficient, corrupt, and incapable, hanging on to power rather than rendering service and giving good governance. Conflicts and instabilities ensued. What was also clear was that most of the essential ingredients needed for those governments to perform were not there in the first instance, and many were struggling with conflict resolution and conflict management to ensure peace and security as basis for governance and for their own survival. Serious lack of human and physical capacity, lack of sustenance or focus on agriculture, not only for food and nutrition security, but as a basis for industrialization and revenue for government, particularly foreign exchange earning. But as President Suglo said, we now know that even the World Bank was advised not to allow us to work on food production. Poor accessibility to favorable market through tariff and non-tariff barriers to trade. By the time these things were realized, the train had left the station, particularly for Africa south of the Sahara. And this is why the decades of the 80s and 90s were regarded as lost decades for Africa. In the process, the donor communities, most of whom have not reached the generally agreed minimum level of 0.7% of their GDP for ODA, claim to be fatigued, in addition to the fact that most of the aid was consumed in the donor countries by hiring experts and consultants and buying all goods, necessary and unnecessary, from home base for the aid recipient countries out of the aid fund. To this must also be added element of corruption in aid receiving countries, making aid not reaching the billion bottom poor. Even when focus on governments as direct recipient to aid was shifted to civil societies, it did not improve the situation significantly. And this made everybody, both donor and recipient, to be displeased, but also wiser. What are the lessons learned? One, aid in terms of resources transfer must be massive, concentrated, sustained, pointed, and targeted, like the Marshall Plan and the West Germany to East Germany after the Berlin Wall, to make desired impact in the short or middle to middle run. There must also be fertile ground to receive aid. Two, for all-round development in developing countries, emphasis and greater focus must be placed on trade rather than aid. This must be strengthened with domestic and foreign investment. It was the experience in Asia and Latin America, and it will not be different in Africa. Three, aid will still be needed to serve as catalyst and lifeline in emergency relief, to muster and enhance resources for the least developed countries, and to fulfill moral and social responsibility entailed in the Universal Human Rights and the International Covenants on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Four, it is our collective self-interest for growth and common security to remove extreme poverty, inequity, and inequality that can be harmful to all of us. Thinking and working through the challenges, the international community under the auspices of the United Nations brought about, for the first time, the Millennium Development Goals, MDGs. But whatever MDGs will achieve by 2015, it is obvious that the bottom 1 billion poor in the world, and particularly those living in the LDCs, will be untouched. Again, there are common objectives set by the MDGs to be achieved, but there are no common objectives for the donors in assisting to lift up the bottom billion. And in the end, each donor country chooses what is best within its strategic interest, leading to duplication and neglect of those that need the aid most. Let me dwell for a brief while on what Africa had tried to do for itself to make a change. Having realized that we were never going to get out of the loop except by our own bootstraps. We in Africa at the turn of the millennium took it upon ourselves to be the architects of our development, because we realized that poverty is not a destiny. It is a fact. It is, in fact, a choice made through inappropriate policies. At this point, we undertook series of reforms which were necessary to transform our countries from inability in performance to self-empowerment and transformation. We supported MDGs. We transformed our regional organization and its guiding philosophy with the African Union, replacing the Organization of African Unity. And we have Constitutive Act that places good governance, peace, security, and stability, social economic reforms at the core of our cooperation among our countries. We established for the first time in the history of Africa a common economic agenda and program in the form of NEPAD, which we presented to our development partners for their endorsement. We even established a self-monitoring and self-sanctioning mechanism called the African Peer Review Mechanism. But in spite of these efforts, which have led to GDP growth of over 5% in the last decade, the total number of poor in Africa has increased. We have had growth without common prosperity, which is dangerous not only for Africa, but for the world as a whole. It is not Africa alone that has this problem, but the largest number of LDC, least developed countries, are located in Africa, which also hosts 40% of the bottom billion. We know that aid alone cannot be the panacea to all the problems of the bottom poor billion citizens living in Africa, Latin America, the Pacific, Caribbean, and Asia. But aid can be catalytic and can make a difference. Without asking for addition to the quantum of aid available, can a percentage of what is available be earmarked and targeted to the bottom billion as a lifeline? And here, the study of the chairman of Sasakawa Peace Foundation becomes relevant. And as we have heard from the chairman himself, the work of Sasakawa Peace Foundation has been done on this issue, and their proposal for a new priority for aid to eradicate extreme poverty requires our understanding and endorsement. It will make globalization inclusive, life-enhancing, environmentally and socially sustainable. Globalization must mean the same thing to all people, and that is enhancement of their well-being and living conditions. The chairman of Sasakawa Peace Foundation had also reported there's already some confluence of ideas in this direction, which can be put to work. As Sasakawa Peace Foundation was doing its work on the issue, the UN came up with the idea of a global fund for social protection. The ILO and the WHO have jointly come up with a scheme not too dissimilar called Social Protection Floor Initiative. We in Africa can only be very happy at the timely proposal of these similar ideas, and we must endorse a common proposal to achieve the same purpose. We are not unmindful, of course, that getting a committed agreement on such a proposal will take time, but we have to begin. With the new realization, we need to move forward by considering the following. One, critically assess the progress, achievement, and failures of MDGs so that the successor to the MDG can build on the progress an achievement and avoid the failure. 2, trade must be taken as a means of enhancing common prosperity throughout the world, and market accessibility is crucial. 3, human capacity development will still be an essential part of ensuring ability and effective performance, and there must also be capacity retention in the country that developed the capacity. We have, in Nigeria, we have well over 10,000 doctors in the US who are trained in Nigeria. 4, aid must not be ignored. It will still be critical for sustenance of development in many countries of the LDCs, and it will act as catalyst for development and a lifeline for the bottom billion. It is indispensable for emergency relief. Finally, and here at this point, there must be a serious consideration of Sasakawa Peace Foundation proposal to be harmonized with other similar proposals as part and parcel of the emerging successor to the MDGs. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, President Obasanjo, in particular for your support of the policy conclusions of the project of the Sasakawa Peace Foundation. And I think it was also very important that you said it is in our collective interest of all of us, OECD countries, middle-income countries, and developing countries, also in their responsibility as recipient countries to get rid of extreme poverty. Our next speaker is President Hoffmann, who was head of state of Mauritius from 2002 to 2003. Before his election as president of the country, he served in several ministerial posts between 1981 and 1991, including that of a Minister for Economic Planning and Development. He is well known for his major contribution to social cohesion in his country. And one important point which meets already one point, that of human development, of the contribution of President Obasanjo, is that he fought very hard even against IMF and World Bank recommendations to have free education and free healthcare in his country. The floor is yours, Mr. President.
Thank you, the Chair. First, I would like to thank the Forum 2000 to give me the opportunity to be here today, and the Sasakawa Peace Foundation for inviting me and giving the chance to be here with you today. This is my first participation to that kind of event. I've heard a lot of President Havel, and his spirit is what we are trying to put in practice in Mauritius. Mauritius is a small place, 1.3 million people. It is less than 2,000 square kilometers. We have no gold, no petrol, nothing. We are overcrowded there. 589 inhabitants to the square kilometers. We are a pluricultural society, 2/3 Hindus and Muslim, 1/3 Christian, and we are not killing one another. I'm not telling it's easy. It's not easy. Mauritius is one of the rare countries. When we had independence in 1968, somebody who was awarded the Nobel Prize of Economy said there is no future for Mauritius. And we proved him wrong. Why? Because today, Mauritius in the 54 countries of Africa, is one of the leading countries in Africa. And we are very ambitious in Mauritius. We want to be what Singapore has done with Asia. We want to do the same and bridging the two continents that is going to work in partnership in the future, Asia and Africa. Why I'm telling you that? And you are right, we have to plan for the MDGs 2015. What are we going to do after that? You're right, President, when you say, let us talk business with them. But one thing that we must have in mind during our discussion, and we in Mauritius, we see it, the movement of Asia in Africa. The two leading economies of the world today is India and China. And Mauritius is in the middle of the way. We find the movement going on there. Believe me, there is an interest, a growing interest for Africa today. Last year it was not the same, but this year is increasing. Why? Because, as President Obasanjo told you, the worst countries, that sub-Saharan countries, which are the poorest, are making 5 to 6% annual growth, when Europe cannot make 2 or 3% annual growth. So this is what is happening there. And Africa has got all the raw materials that the world needs. And believe me, there is going to be a merger between two continents, Asia and Africa. And in the years to come, it's going to be like that. The competition is on now. Many European countries, where I discuss with them about to have another way of looking to Africa, they are a bit afraid of the competition of India and China. But I told them, you have a seat which has been reserved for you, and you have a policy of empty seats. So somebody is going to sit on it. So why don't you take the seat that has been reserved for you? They don't want. And believe me, things are moving. What have the Europeans? They have the technology. And the new technology that Africa is needed is solar, new energies, solar energy, wind energy. Europe has got that. Why don't you take advantage of it? Africa is a country where we don't have a lot of fixed telephone, but we are the continent with the more mobile phone in the world. Because there is no telephone, everyone has got a mobile. So this is what is happening in Africa today. And being aware of these things, you must take advantage of what is going to happen. And the project that you are putting in front of us is a good project. It is the right time to put it forward, because many people will look at it as a way to do business with Africa. And if we can get them to do business in Africa, they will be attracted. Because things are moving now. I'm telling you, things are moving now. Not in 2 or 5 years. It is moving now. And you must take advantage of that time, which is very important to do. And why I think it's important, because, you know, small Mauritius, we used to have, in the beginning, only sugar. In the 70s. Only sugar was the main crop. And only sugar bring money. But today, we not only have sugar, we have textile, we have financial sector, we have tourism, we have IT. So we have diversified a lot, and we are investing also in Africa. Many investment were doing that. And this is what is happening today. And by having that contribution to make AIDS differently, I think it is time that we can explain to people. But first, I think there is one big obstacle. We must have a new mindset. People must think differently. You see, I give two examples to explain why I think there must be a new mindset. Let's take for the GMOs. This is a good idea for production. I'm not talking about the health aspect of it. But once you take the grain, you can't use the same grain next year. You have to go back to buy the grain to the monopoly things. So why is it in this world today, when we have discovered something we can be benefit for humanity, why is it that we keep that and we make a monopoly of it? With the MDGs, is that like this? Let's take another example for HIV/AIDS. You know what has happened? Some Indian company has been sued because they have not respected the patent. You know that. But the medicine for saving the life for people, why do we keep it for oneself? So that is why I'm telling you, it's a new mindset that we have to put forward. And it's not easy. It is not easy. Because why is it that in Mauritius we succeed when we have nothing? We manage to make an economic miracle because we give in Mauritius free education for all, free medical service for everyone. Every citizen reaching the age of 60 got a small pension, whether he has plus a contributive pension. He got it because our philosophy is that if you make the wealth of a nation, you must benefit of it. See, this is what we do. So I think President Havel thinks that way. Can we think a world where, for instance, in the field of discovery of the grain for agriculture, GMOs for agriculture, why do I have to buy it with a monopoly? Why? When people are dying in Africa a lot, why can't we share that experience with other people? Why can't we do that? I'm going to surprise many of you about that, but it is the point. And President Havel has been talking about that kind of things. And that is why I say, Mr. Chair, we must have a new mindset in order to succeed in that thing. Thank you.
Mindset is nearly needed everywhere. It's needed in the whole concept of aid for development. It is needed in the aid program for the bottom billion. But it's also needed in other aspects where you said, okay, and I think President Obasanjo said the same in a sense, growth of 5 to 6%, but still growth without increase in prosperity. The new mindset also, I think, has to be introduced in the economic strategy, and I noted very well that you said diversification of the economy is needed already in the early stages of development. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of the second part of our session, and I would like to invite you to have a special applauding for the three heads of states for their fantastic contribution. I was told there's now a new setup, Mr. Hanyu, that you and the presidents would leave the panel, or you stay? You leave, okay.
We can leave now.
Yeah, apparently yes. And I would like then to invite, or if you would like to stay and participate in the panel discussion, please do so. Okay, but I leave it to you. I know that presidents normally have not to answer questions.
Okay.
And I would like to invite our two panel discussants, Oniang'o, who is Executive Director of the Rural Outreach Program in Kenya, and on the other hand, Nuria Molina-Gallart. She is the Director of Policy Research in Save the Children in the United Kingdom. And of course, Professor Itoh will stay in the panel. As Professor Itoh and I myself had already the chance to speak to you, maybe Ruth, you could take the floor immediately and give your interpretation from the point of view of an NGO. Sure. No, micros, please.
It's a new one. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, it works.
Okay, I come from Kenya. Jambo, everyone. We say jambo. That's a greeting, okay? Yeah, just before lunch. I hope you are still awake. As I said earlier, this is my first time in Prague, but I've heard of President Havel and this idea of giving power to the powerless. You know, it's very powerful. I think all of us need to absorb it. So let me thank the Sasakawa Peace Foundation for inviting me here. And I'm here because actually I chair the Sasakawa Africa Association. Sasakawa Africa Association is an NGO. It was started by late Sasakawa, who called Norman Borlaug, and then co-opted the support of former President Jimmy Carter of the USA in 1984 during the Ethiopian famine, which killed 1 million Ethiopians. The rest is history. We continue to go on. Late Sasakawa died and handed on the mantle to his son Yohe. And then Norman Borlaug, who is popularly known in many circles as the father of the Green Revolution in Asia, also died in 2009. I had just joined the board. They didn't have many women there. And then before you know it, they were telling me, can you chair the board? Yeah, so I chair the board. They don't really work in Kenya, but I follow their work because they target heads of state. And if you are willing to have your people supported, smallholder farmers, they then go and start working with smallholder farmers. We still do that now to try and get them to realize food security and also some incomes out of agriculture. And they got me on board because that's the same thing actually I do in Kenya. So I am an academic, food science and nutrition professor, but at the same time I've been in the Kenyan parliament for virtually, I mean, I didn't contest, I was just invited to join for 5 years. I was in opposition. I like opposition politics. I'm always asking questions. This can be done better. Why do you do this? So I'm happy, really, to see these 3 former heads of states of African countries, and we should have more of them leaving office, you know, when they can travel to speak the truth, because the truth will set you free. If they were still in office, they will not be saying these nice things they are saying. Yeah, they will not be saying it. So that's why governance, timed leadership, and making space for others and reflecting on what you could have done better and trying to even do things better is so crucial here. Now, this project that I've just heard of, since we were in Tokyo, Wolf, was so crucial for us, you know, saying, look, we're in this together. Now, if we were not in this together, the Roichi Sasakawa would not have come to Ethiopia. And right now, I can tell you, we work in Ethiopia. That's where our regional office is. We work in Mali, we work in Uganda, and we also work in Nigeria, northern Nigeria. But what we have learned is that it's so important to have peace and security in order to do any kind of development. It's important to have peace and security so people do not feel insecure and they are moving on. They become refugees in other lands, or they become internally displaced in their own countries. They cannot do farming. But I'm a believer in the fact that Africa really right now is one of the greatest resourced continents on this globe in terms of people, in terms of natural resources, and in terms of the will for people to do things better for themselves. And this whole idea of being a begging continent does not sit well with me. My mother used to tell me, Ruth, my daughter, my child, one thing you can never do, never beg for food. When you beg for food, nobody respects you. It robs you of your dignity. And so my own country, Kenya, we should not be experiencing any poverty or any hungry people. We get early warning, drought is coming. We sit back, we don't listen. Then drought comes, and the first thing we go out, we are begging. Begging to receive food which people won't even eat. They don't even like to eat when we can actually grow. So what I do most of the time is advocacy. I do advocacy, and my advocacy, especially to our own governments, governance, in areas where people don't want to talk about corruption. I mentioned that word, corruption. In areas where you find aid has come in terms of grain, and in fact you find it being sold. In terms of where you have too much inequity, where there are some of the richest people in this world are found on that African continent. And the majority of the poorest are also found in that African continent. So what's wrong? It's like having a head of household who doesn't know how to feed their own children. I mean, who can respect you? In any culture, nobody will respect you. So we are saying that even as we come with these ideas, like this great idea, that we should also be ready to be part of this idea. It's not an SPF idea. It's not a Sasakawa idea. It's an idea which should appeal to all of us as humanity. And I believe late President Havel, the reason why his message appealed to all of us, it talked about basic humanity, respect for your fellow human being, caring for your fellow human being, not being greedy, because at the end of the day, you are greedy. When he died, he didn't go down with the Prague. You know, he has left it here. You know, his country is still here as he dies. But what will live on is his spirit, yet the legacy you leave behind. And I believe this forum will even grow much, much bigger because now he is a spirit and he's here with us. And I think these are messages that cut across all of us, and we want to be able to appeal to this. And what we know is that aid, ODA, has been going up. Countries' economic growth, 6–10%. But one time I asked in the parliament, Kenya, you say you are 10, 11% growing economically, and yet when I go down to the women and men and the youth I work with, they don't feel a single change. What is wrong? There's something very wrong. Something wrong with the prioritization, something wrong with accountability, something wrong with the transparency, something wrong with the distribution. So as we talk of all of us, the more developed countries coming to assist us, you know, it is morally right to do so, because I normally say everybody came from Africa, by the way. Yeah? Remember, all of you people, you came from Africa. So it's important that we're in this together and that we do the right thing. And so my work is normally on education, educating people, educating women, particularly youth. We are sitting on a time bomb of a lot of idle, educated youth who have no jobs. Those jobs could be found in agriculture to even enhance food security for the continent. And the land grab issue, as we talk of Asia, India, China coming to Africa, it should be transparent, and we should be able to absorb that. Otherwise, the same continent will just be taken away from under our feet. So it's a question of just really knowing that who are you responsible for as a leader, and what is your role in all this. So thank you very much. I'll stop it here.
Many thanks, Ruth. Thank you very much, Ruth, for your engaging and engaged contribution. I will pass the floor on to Nuria Molina, and please, perhaps you give a chance that also Mr. Itoh has a few minutes. We will overdraw a little bit.
Sure. Thanks very much for inviting us to the privilege of being the discussant of such a prominent panel. It's impossible to do justice to comment and discuss the wealth of interventions that have been put forward until the moment. So I'm going to focus on one particular dimension which has been put forward in the proposals today and has come up as well recurrently in the previous speaker's remarks, which is the issue of disparities and inequality. But I can't refrain but making a very brief comment on one issue that also has come recurrently in the three presentations of the three former presidents, and in fact this is the experience of structural adjustment in Africa. President Hoffman has rightly said that Europe has a technology, but I think that when it comes to structural adjustment, Europe should better be listening the wealth of experience that you have. So they should probably be listening to your advice before taking some decisions. But let me go back to the issue of disparities and inequality. We've had, as all of you know, and previous speakers have flagged, unprecedented progress in the last decade. Unprecedented progress towards the MDGs, reducing child mortality, hunger, towards halving extreme poverty. We've got unprecedented levels of high transfers of ODA, international aid to poorer countries, and also growth, as the presidents have said, not only in Asia, but also in Africa, much higher than in advanced economies right now, and much more resilient to the global crisis than advanced economies right now. So obviously, this sets a whole new brave world and scenario, but there are very important challenges. And one challenge is how do we make sure that all these assets, that all this growth is broadly shared. Hence, inequality is becoming, as identified in the proposals put forward by the Foundation, probably as one of the main development challenges at the moment. It's fundamental in order to achieve the MDGs, and it's fundamental in order to finish the job we started with the MDGs, so we don't halve poverty, we don't reduce child mortality, but actually we eradicate the worst ills. But it's also very important to sustain growth, for instance. We all know that without having broadly shared growth, aggregate demand won't be sustained over time either. For us at Save the Children, inequality, it's a fundamental matter for development because it's about giving every child a fair chance at life, equal opportunities. And with increasing gaps, with increasing disparities, there is no way that the generation that is now at childhood, in 2030, when we have the next generation of MDGs, will actually have fulfilled their full potential. So this is why we think inequality is fundamental, and this is why we very much welcome the proposals of the Foundation, and actually we have also placed inequality in the center of our priorities at Save the Children, and also as a result of our experience with implementing the MDGs throughout the last decade and the things that we've learned as main challenges going forward. Incidentally, actually, next week we are publishing the first research report as part of a broad and ambitious program on inequality that we are starting. So we would be very happy to share with you all when it's published next week. But there's 3 very brief findings that I would like to share as a preview of this research at the moment, and 3 main findings which I think might be interesting for the discussion. One is, we've looked into a sample of countries in order to try to test the hypothesis of how children live inequality. And one of the key findings has been that children in the countries that we have conducted the research are twice as unequal as the general population. And why does this matter? Well, because actually this curtails the opportunities of children, and we are putting a mortgage, a very heavy mortgage, in fulfilling the potential of these children and fulfilling as well human capital, productivity, and the potential of growth of many countries. So this is the first finding. If in the general population, adults usually, in the countries that we've researched, in the richest decile are 17 times wealthier than in the poorest decile, for children, this is the double. It's 35 times. And in countries where inequality is very extreme, such as Bolivia, the richest children are 122 times wealthier than the poorest. And this obviously poses a serious, serious barrier to achieving the MDGs. The second main finding is that actually inequality, it's not bad as it is, but in the last 2 decades, it's been growing. And I'm talking about inequality within countries. As the professor has said at the beginning, inequality is a very complex phenomenon, and it's a multidimensional one. I'm talking about inequality within countries, where there's been strides in terms of human development and growth, but within the countries, this progress has not been broadly shared. We've seen in 2/3 of the countries that we have researched what we call exclusive or regressive growth as opposed to inclusive growth. So we've seen the income available for the poorest households and the poorest children, in some cases, go backwards, and in most of the cases, progress, but progress at a much lower pace than in the richest households. And obviously that's what we call regressive growth, because growth is not evenly shared across the population. What does this mean for children in particular? Well, it means that, for instance, in Nigeria, the poorest children have more than twice chances to die before their 5th birthday than the richest children. That's just staggering inequality. In China, in rural China, children have 20% chances of being stunted, which means that they don't fully develop because of food deprivation and nutrition deprivation. This is only 1/6 in urban population. And we could go through a number of different indicators that range from health to nutrition, and we would find that this is what inequality means for children now, but as I've said before as well, for the productivity, for the potential GDP growth of this human capital in the future decades to come. So to conclude, to one of the main questions that the research that has been published and put forward by the Foundation points is this inevitable? Is this part of the growth process? Do we have to just come to terms with it as if it was a natural phenomenon? Well, the answer very clearly for us is no. The international frameworks, national policies matter a lot. And we've seen that comparing trends in inequality in 8 different case studies that we have conducted for this research in low-income countries, but also in middle-income countries, including China, Nigeria, India, but also in high-income countries, in the UK and in Canada, how inequality plays in children and in the prospects for well-being and for growth in a country. And looking, I'm not going to go in detail, so actually I'm hoping that you go back to the research when it's published next week, but we've seen that a number of policies that resonate very much in what has been said before: transparency, accountability, good management of natural resources, good health, good education, good quality education, makes a whole difference in the results for children and in the results of inequality. So we definitely think that there are many lessons to learn in the experiences of countries, but there's as well a key lesson to learn as we rethink the next development paradigm and the next development framework that it's supposed to come after 2015, after the MDGs, and definitely we think that inequality should be right and center, and that in one ways or another, targets and indicators should be enshrined in this framework to make sure that we don't only sustain growth and progress, but that this is broadly shared. Thank you.
Many thanks, Nuria. I had initially thought and hoped that we would have 2 rounds of discussion in the panel, but I see time constraints coming on us. But I was also told that I could overdraw 5 to 10 minutes, which would give you, Itoh-san, the possibility to comment on a few things you have observed related to our project.
Well, actually, I learned a lot from the 2 panelists, and again, I just confirmed this issue is very complicated. So we have to be sophisticated, but at the same time, we have to be well aware of the many information. Well, I think we are in the same boat is very important issues, because this kind of big event cannot be just moved just by the limited number of experts or just some group of people. So especially in this point of time where we have to rethink about MDG in the future, the more participation is very important. And also, I think your presentation is very, very powerful, because you just gave us just complete numbers. That's maybe a very good, important starting point for ordinary people to think about this, because the access to the ordinary people is probably very important to mobilize this issue. I'm very sure that the experts are just working very hard to just move this way, and they are doing. I hope they are continuing this effort. But without just participation of the ordinary people, we cannot just move the policy in the donor countries and also the recipient countries. So I think in that respect, the more communication should be made between the 2 countries. And thirdly, I think, again, I want to just mention just the inequality and the poverty is very complicated creatures, because it is very much related, of course, but depending on if you look at just the situation of poverty in one country, like such as sub-Saharan countries, and a country like China's, maybe the effective approach is very different. Also, just the final target maybe is very similar, how you can save the children, how you can just product the more prosperous future, but the approach is very difficult. So unfortunately, we have a kind of limited amount of resources, so how we can just focus the use of resources to just more effective way of achieving our goal is very important. But anyway, I learned a lot from the expert on this issue. Thank you.
Many thanks, Itoh-san. Ladies and gentlemen, I expect you do not expect me to do a resume of such a rich discussion. Nevertheless, I would like to underline a few points. I think there's complete agreement in this group, at least, those who spoke, and if I looked at the audience, it seems to me, in much of the audience too, that we need to take care of the bottom billion. The bottom billion was initially defined by $1.25 per day. The bottom billion would be much bigger if we would go to $2 per day, which is still very little. We understand, I think, that remove extreme poverty is a collective, is in our collective interest. And I remember that President Tsoukalos referred to the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan, I remember well, when it was announced at the Harvard University by Secretary Marshall, was presented to the Americans as a venture in their own interest. It was not just giving some money for the reconstruction of Europe. But Marshall told them, if we do this, this is in our own interest, and he was right. I think something like that, we need to, this idea we need to spread. And in this sense, I hope that many of you will leave this room in a new mindset, and please reinform this new mindset outside this room. I thank you very much. I thank the members of the panel. I thank the heads of states, and I thank Mr. Hanyu in particular for having set up the project and this meeting. This is the end of the meeting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry.